Baal and Christianity. Lots of confusion on this one. Seriously, you want to get into a spinning teacup, this is a subject that will do it. But hopefully, I think at the end of this presentation, we'll bring some clarity to the subject. Now, this is part one, because this is an in-depth presentation. Background: Baal, the god portrayed in the Old Testament as the great rival to the God Yahweh, whose worship was considered by the prophets as an abomination, is in fact the model for the Christ story, oddly enough. And Christianity is a morphed version of the Baal legend, not a reformed version of Judaism, nor a new covenant with the Yahweh. Yeah, that one kind of gets us, doesn't it? So when you look at Baal in the traditional biblical sense, oddly enough, the history shows, particularly recent archaeological history, that these two deities coexisted. In fact, it is said that they are, in fact, brothers. Yahweh is brother to Baal, whereas Baal is the brother of Yahweh. So lots of, again, confusion. Not what we have been told, is it? Oh, it gets better. So when we look at Baal, how does he look? What does he look like? Well, notice this depiction. Folks, this one is very much telling. There's got symbolism all over this one. But it's not the only picture. Here's one of Baal slaying the dragon that the Jesus, who Baal came to rescue from the dragon. And thus you get the legend of St. George. Yeah, a little different, isn't it? And then you get this one of a creature that has horns growing out of its head, but loving humanity, suckling humanity, protecting humanity, a friend of humanity. And this is where our story begins. Because as history is now beginning to show, we may have the wrong gods in the wrong position. The one that's there now is proving to be no friend to humanity. And the one that's reviled and despised may in fact be the one who is the true friend. This work is taken from a work by Glenn Young, who has done an incredible amount of research in bringing out the facts. And as more and more archaeological finds are brought to the world, and we begin to understand the cultures that have been lost for millennia, we're now beginning to find out it's a different story. So it is the blending of politics with cultural history and with religious history. They all dovetail together. Now, this presentation is how the rivalry between the cult of Yahweh and the worshipers of Baal helped to create Christianity. And we'll be discussing in length the religious intolerance in the Western world. In fact, when measured to the history of humanity, the record shows that this thing called Christianity has murdered more innocent human beings than any other religion ever on the planet. So let's talk about the rivals between Baal and Yahweh. This is not a religious presentation, but a presentation on the history of religious development, the mundane and the not sacred. This is a story not much told or much understood in the modern world. This is the story of the rivalry of Baal and Yahweh, brothers, and how, in fact, Baal really won out over Yahweh. But for the longest period of time, it has been suppressed. And by the way, Baal is not the devil. Baal is the beloved God. Yeah, I know. Here's some of you talking right now. I can read your minds. Let's continue. We live in a Christian-dominated West that knows little about the rivalry except what we have been taught was in the Bible, which is obviously very pro-Yahweh. That's what the book is. And in the Bible, the worship of Baal is portrayed as the greatest of evils. Always remarkable, though, how the tribes of Israel always reverted back to that. Most of the other ancient sources praising Baal have been destroyed a great deal by the Christians. And folks, I don't care what this does to your consciousness. The fact is, the Christian church has burned more history than any other religion. It's just got to be accepted. And it's not picking on the Christians. It's the fact that the world wants this church to be held accountable for the history it tried to erase and replace with its own. That's the problem. Now, to understand the real nature of the rivalry, we need to cover thousands of years of history, present a history very different than what is popularly understood, and fight the current beliefs of entrenched religions who demand that their beliefs are based in history because they're writing the history. And the fact of the matter is, we know that most really didn't happen. We also need to understand how and why cultures change. Societies and the religions of cultures change with crises. And crises are caused by four things: external factors, invasions, lost wars, those kind of things; environmental changes, drought, changes in river courses; internal crisis, politics, upheavals, coups, population imbalances, over and under, populations that die out because the generations are not reproducing, or it could be a combination of all the above. Now, you have to understand how the Hebrews became the Israelites, and how the Israelites became the Judeans and then became Jews. We also need to understand how the Roman Empire, its rise and its fall, and how the Baalist religion became a major element of Christianity. If you will understand and read history, you will find that the makers of Christianity were very much involved in the worship of Baal. Now, there was a rival to that, none too happy about this, and a compromise was reached. It's what we call the Bible today. We need to understand the crisis that led to these changes in society itself. Facts based on facts. All the statements in this presentation that deal with history and wars and events and everything else except Christian dogma. It will deal with the facts of history, not the recreated reality. We will also deal with facts supported by a wide range of verifiable sources. And all the statements on the rise and fall of empires and mass slaughters by the Christians are not disputed by history. It's just the way it is, folks. And in order for us to go forward, we have to reconcile the past. It's just that simple. This confirmable history is not well known because it often conflicts with the Christian view of history. What the church wants everyone to think is that only the Bible and the Bible stories are important. Everything that went before was false and evil and of little consequence, and they alone were persecuted for their beliefs. And what is in the Bible is truth. And all of these are contradictions. And for 1,700 years, the church threatened torture and death to any who challenged the biblical truth. I mean, if you looked at all the blood that was spent by those who challenged this theology, it's only been in the very recent past, and I mean recent, last 300-400 years, that a person like myself could actually speak out against the church, speak out against the Bible, and not be in fear of having my head chopped off or my wife, children, and everyone else burned at the stake. Or worse. To get beyond the Christian truth, we need to know about Baal himself. What is this deity? What we know now from sources other than the Bible is this, that for thousands of years of history, in most developed areas of the West, and despite what the church would have us believe, it was Baal that was well known and the loved God. And it was Yahweh that was despised, hated, and was of little importance. And if not for the small little clans, was virtually unknown, whereas Baal was well known. Again, if it was not Baal himself who was loved, it was Baal in other forms and other names, including the Greek god Zeus and the Roman Jupiter. The Baal-like gods dominated religious life in much of the Mediterranean basin and continued to do so for thousands of years. And here's the other thing. Most people have got this crazy idea that, well, it was the Garden of Eden, and, there was just these two people, and they just walked out in the whole world, and there was nothing else out there, and that's where everything started. Wrong. Not even close. It's a myth. But yet, people will actually think that the world is less than 6,000 years old, and that the genealogy, that's listed in the Bible is somehow fact. And therefore, you can reconcile that the world is only 6,000 years old. That's how they do it. Baal was a remake of a far more ancient god. Bel of the Babylonians and Bel came from a far more ancient stories. The Akkadians and before even the Sumerians. All these stories moved from the east to the west and morphed over time, at least 6, perhaps 12,000 years before the time of the story of the Christ. Now, Bel was Babylonian. Stories 5,000 years passed on as Christian myths of St. George. Yeah. So much of this is today in modern Christianity. People don't like to believe that, but it's the truth. So despite what the church would have us believe, for the most of the 2,000 years from Abraham to the Christ, there was not much of a rivalry between Baal and Yahweh, except for the preaching of a few prophets. For most of history, real history, Baal was the dominant god of the area. And if not, much of the West, the Mediterranean basin, folks. And we're going to learn about a people that dominated, were much smarter than the Hebrews, more advanced than the Hebrews, had dominated. They were great. The Hebrews were nothing, folks. They were a little clan. But the way you have it today, you would think that the world itself originated there. The followers of Yahweh were simple, but they played a part in history, obviously. For thousands of years, it was Baal who was the god of many prosperous and successful cities and whole regions of the ancient world. It was the followers of Baal who created the first great empire in the West, stretching from the mountains of Lebanon to the Atlantic Ocean. It was the Baalists who created the foundations of all the great ancient cultures that followed. Despite what the church would have us believe, it was Baalism that was the foundation of all Greek and Roman gods. As we will see, it was another remake of Baal that was the foundation of Christianity itself. And what the church didn't want us to know is this: the fact it was Baal, in that name, who was the first choice of the Roman emperors to be the one and true God of the empire. Some 150 years before Yahweh and the Christ gained that status, which was around 305 AD. The fight for the one God, the one emperor system, was started long before Constantine. There were at least 3 alternatives tried before Yahweh and Jesus finally took. Now remember, Christianity did not have a God, and they were based upon the Roman government, monotheism. And so there you had the male matriarch dogma. This is what we have. And what most people don't understand was that there was no Christianity until Constantine. Most people have no understanding that they were, at best, sects, S-E-C-T-S, cults of all different various kinds. The same thing that has happened to Christianity today. Christianity is a fractured religion. Over 30,000 different denominations. How can that be one unified religion? And what happened at the very beginning is happening at the end. It's just a fact. And while this glory was happening to the followers of Baal, the followers of Yahweh were confined to 2 small, weak, and unimportant little kingdoms, who were all but erased from history and seemed at the time to have added very little new to the culture of their region. Monotheism seemed very odd at the time and also was not even considered as an original concept of the Yahweh cult. But with the triumph of Christianity in the West and its adoption of the Old Testament in more recent times, Yahweh seems to have won out, and we have accepted the Bible stories as being true. The world has mostly forgotten the success of the followers of Baal. For Baal, the evil that one does lives after them. With the triumph of Christianity, as expected, Baal, the old arch-rival of Yahweh, was deified and became the prototype representation of the devil, Satan. Remember, folks, the devil didn't exist before Christianity. Satan didn't exist before Christianity, at least not in the form. And Lucifer doesn't exist at all. Never existed in the Hebraic, never existed in the Sumerian, the Akkadian, the Mesopotamians, the Babylonians. Doesn't exist. The rituals associated with Baal became the model of hell. Burning in hellfire was based in large part on Baalism ritual of human sacrifice. And folks, if that repulses you, get used to it. Because that's where all religions has its basis in human sacrifice. It's a fact. As it's stated in the Bible, the passing of the children through the fire. What the church didn't want us to know is that in his time, Baal was the most popular of the gods, and he was such for thousands of years. He was the dominant god far longer than Christianity has been dominant. You see, Christianity is just another player. 5,000 years, there's going to be a new religion and a new god. To understand this evolution, this morphing of Baal to both become the devil and Christ, we need to understand that. You see, you don't realize it, but that's the foundation of this belief system. Now, the Mormons believe that Jesus and Satan are brothers. The Catholic Church worships Lucifer and states as such that Jesus is the son of Lucifer. Popular religions don't really fade away, but just change names and stories a little bit. It's called Hellenization. You are a Hellenist. That's what Christianity is. It's a Hellenist religion. In fact, I would dare say all religions are Hellenist religions. And the Jesus story is clearly part of an ancient tradition associated with Baal and Baalism. In fact, you can go back to Orsisis and further back. The story of the virgin birth was not a Christian or Jewish concept. It's just a fact. Again, they borrowed it. Therefore, to understand this concept of Jesus as Baal, we need to understand what the church has tried to keep from us from knowing. We need to unlearn what commonly held as truth. We need to learn what is now known to be fact outside of the biblical truth, because the biblical truth is not truth. We need to look beyond the church telling us of the story and controlling the narrative. That's what has to happen here. The effort to end the grip of the church in controlling the narrative of history is not new. Many, many, many of the past have attempted to do this. What they didn't have, which we have today, is archaeological evidence, technology that can't be disputed. I think when you think about over the centuries, how many have tried to come out and show that there's a different truth than the Bible. Most of our founding fathers here in America were deists. Revolutionary France even outlawed the religion of Christianity. And Christianity was greatly ridiculed in pre-World War I in England. Thomas Paine went from being one of the top 3 founding fathers to being written out of American history for his book, The Age of Reason, which showed the contradictions of biblical writings. Today, most of Europe is only technically Christian, with less than 10% of the church attendance in many countries. The fastest growing religious group in the world today is non-believers. But over time, the efforts fade in face of religious counter-revolutions. We evolve. And we will evolve out of this belief system. So after centuries of Christian control of history and constant efforts to defeat the rationalists and their challenges to Christianity, the Christian view of history still holds, at least in the West. This view of history, this denial of other people's history that goes back so much further than the West, so limits our abilities in the world today. But that is the total different presentation. Much of what we think is fact is not. And many facts we have no knowledge of. For example, today, we mainly accept the kingdom of David, despite the fact that there is no supporting documentation of the Bible outside the Bible. There's no archaeological evidence of it. They can't find anything of it, of ever such a kingdom. Denying the extent and success of great rival of Yahweh, followers of Baal, despite extensive evidence, undisputed documentary, show the success of the followers of Baal. They were very prosperous. And you know, the problem is there's nothing to back this up. But when we look at real history, for instance, the Phoenicians, which were at the same time, very much different story, folks. Think about it. You're trying to rationalize an Old Testament as the foundation of world history, and it has nothing to do with world history at all. Of an unseen, unknown deity that somehow now is morphed into being God of the world. We know that the term Baal refers to many things, including a particular god with a particular tradition, mainly the chief storm god of the Phoenician Canaanite culture. And it's the Canaanites, folks. They were there before the Hebrews. They fought the Hebrews and they won. They never went away. The Hebrews never conquered Canaan. The Canaanites still to this day, their ancestry is still in the region. And the collective beliefs of the Phoenicians, or Baalism, such as the term in Hinduism, Baal, as the term simply means God, or more precisely, Lord. So every time you say Lord Jesus, what you are saying, Baal is Jesus. And you may not like that. You may absolutely just make your skin crawl when I say that. But you have got to understand the title of Jesus, which doesn't exist. There never was a man named Jesus. You got to get that into your head. And so when you take the title Jesus as Lord, what you literally are saying, and it translates this, that you are saying Jesus is Baal. Or my Lord and Savior is Baal is my Savior. And saying Baal as the Lord, both human Lord and divine Lord, was used for thousands of years, folks. The Christians just stole it. But there's so much more when you realize how many names that you are probably praying that, again, you don't even know what you're praying to. To understand how Jesus is Baal, we need to know a lot of history and the crisis that changed the world from outside of the Bible. We need to understand that little in the Bible about the development of the Israelites is historically correct. The Chronicles and Kings, while not supported by facts, were written to support a minority religious sect called the Yahwist. It's how it is. You also need to know that through political and social crisis, one God could become another, and another, and another. And this was something quite traditional in the religions of the world. Every time a culture would come up and you had a better God or a better religious system, it's called Hellenizing, adapting. Call them the Borg. You need to understand that it was often the profane that created the sacred and not the sacred that shaped the profane. Sacred writings often were trying to explain the politics of the ground of the moment of the day. To start with, we need to know how findings of archaeological diggings has changed so much of our understanding. And folks, let me just tell you, it began to change radically in the 1870s. And what was supposed to have been through the British Museum to begin for the School of Biblical Archaeology, excuse me, was to prove the Bible. And it did just the opposite. In fact, they've actually shown it isn't the case at all. Archaeologists now know that there's a different history, and that as far as we can continue to dig, we continue to find lost ancient cultures. And we're going to have to put them into our timeline. And when you put them into the timeline, well, we've got problems right here in River City, folks. And the examples are many, just to name a few. While there is proof of Jericho, and it was one of the great Canaanite cities, however, the Bible time frame for their destruction is 300 years after what the research shows. There has never been any physical evidence of any literary evidence of the Hebrew Exodus or great plagues upon Egypt. There is no record of it. Most likely all made up. If the day went dark when Jesus was crucified, no one in the rest of the world recorded seeing that manifestation. No one recorded it in Jerusalem that day. So how did it happen? What, did it just hit that one little square area? Archaeology has given us great new insights into history, and especially the success of the followers of Walt. The ancient cities of Lebanon and many other places have been unearthed, and the writings found and translated with much new information. This helps us to move away from the relying only on one-sided stories of the Bible for understanding of the ancient world, and particularly the area of the Middle East. One of the most important findings of all of history is that of Ugarit in Syria, an 18th BC major city of great design and beauty. There it is, right there. Are you getting the date on this? 18th BC. 1,800 years BC. The new findings show the people of Ugarit were the Canaanites, what we in the West come to call Phoenicians. They were smart and advanced people who added many things to culture and development of culture. They were perhaps the first to recognize that human speech consists of only a finite number of atomic sounds, and all that was really needed was a symbol for each. They developed 30 symbols from which the alphabets of all phonetic languages are derived. Yes, all: Hebrew, Latin, Sanskrit, Aramaic, Arabic, Greek, English. The names of most letters in the Greek Phoenician alphabet are clearly related to all the others. There's their alphabet. The Phoenicians, a Greek term referring to the purple color cloth trade good, are usually described to us today as the people from only the areas of present-day Lebanon. In fact, all of what is considered Canaan and much more of the Near East from the time of Abraham to David and its famed cities of Jericho, Sodom, and Gomorrah were in fact Phoenician in language, culture, and religion. The Phoenicians were the Canaanites, and the Canaanites were the Phoenicians. We know this from their own writings, and in part of the writings we have recovered from the tablets, the 14th century BC. These people we call the Phoenician called themselves the Kiani, or Kiana, the Canaanites. As found through the libraries of Ugarit, these people were the source of many of the things found in the Bible, copied from this far more ancient culture, word for word in some cases. Many Psalms of the Bible were found almost precisely in earlier writings at Ugarit. Folks, we're talking 1,500 years before it was supposed to have been written in the Bible. Festivals similar to Passover and related holidays were celebrated in Canaanite cities as a harvest festival long before the Exodus. In addition, in the libraries of Ugarit were found the religious texts of the Canaanites. The Baal cycle was found almost complete by the archaeologists, and many stories of the Bible, including similar stories to a Savior, are found in this epic poem in different form and with different names, but the stories are similar. The Canaanites, contrary to the Bible view of them, were a very important people of the ancient world. Even as the Bible shows, they had major cities throughout the land of Abraham. They became the greatest naval power of perhaps the world and knew many key principles of navigation. They traded with the cities of the Mediterranean, Mesopotamia, the Aegean Sea, Egypt, and Asian Minor, and very well South America and North America. Folks, our history is not what we have been told. And here is proof. We don't have to rely on a literary book for a history. We have the historical facts, the artifacts. This is end of part 1. Part 2 will follow.